If I was the president of Nintendo and someone entered my office and pitched me the idea of a Tekken-influenced Pokemon brawler that switches camera perspective from behind the player to side on during the course of a battle, I would have probably called security and had them escorted out of the building. In my opinion, Pokken Tournament is a game that on paper sounds like it just shouldn't work, but somehow against all odds it does. And not only does it work, it's one of the most unique and accessible fighters that I've ever played, and is a wonderful addition to the Wii U's already impressive library of games. It's fair to say that fighting games are a bit of a niche nowadays, with a lot of gamers tending to avoid them due to their rather high barrier of entry. Pokken, however, manages to strike a balance between being appealing to both the hardcore and the casual audience. Unlike legendary fighting franchise Street Fighter, Pokken doesn't require the player to remember complex button prompts in order to perform attacks. Instead, it plays more like Smash Bros, with the player pressing one attack button in sync with a directional input. Despite how easy Pokken's combat may seem when compared to other fighters, it's a foolish assumption to say that it lacks depth. Counters, guard breaks, grabs and synergy blasts are only some of the more advanced techniques available to the player. However, unlike other games in the genre, it doesn't require the player to be a fighting game aficionado in order to be able to execute them. One of the most unique aspects of Pokken's combat is its inclusion of the phase change mechanic. During the start of each battle, the camera is situated behind the player. This is what is known as the field phase. During the field phase, the player has the ability to roam around the arena and perform projectile-based attacks as well as unique melee moves. After landing a strong enough attack during this phase, a phase change will occur, with it switching from field phase to duel phase. The camera will also switch to a more classic side-on view, with gameplay playing more like a standard fighter. I know that this may sound extremely complicated and rather convoluted, but once you actually play the game it soon makes sense, and I find that the phase change mechanic helps to add an extra tactical layer to the combat. Perhaps you want to try and keep your opponent at bay, attacking them from afar, or perhaps you want to get up close and go in for the kill. Well, phase change makes both of these approaches viable options, and I'm sure that other fighting franchises will copy this clever mechanic in the future. Support Pokemon are also a huge part of the game's combat. There are 15 support sets in total, with 2 Pokemon included in each. Prior to each fight, the player is given the option of choosing a support set to take into battle with them, and then must select one Pokemon to aid them in each round. Once the support meter is full, the player can press the L button to unleash their Pokefriend. Although this might seem like just a simple method of gaining a few cheap hits on an opponent, on the contrary, calling in Pokemon to help at the right time can help swing the battle massively in a player's favour. For example, one of my favourite assist Pokemon is Electrode. If the player calls in this red and white ball whilst they are blocking a move from an opponent, Electrode explodes, causing a huge amount of damage to the opposing player. This can potentially prove to be the difference between winning and losing a match. In addition, different strategies call for different support Pokemon. So for instance, if you're worried about going toe to toe with a particularly tough foe, then maybe it would be a wise idea to select Eevee as a support Pokemon, as Eevee has the ability to recover some of the player's HP when called upon. In summary, choosing the correct support set and knowing when to use said Pokemon can actually prove to be vitally important. Whilst I'm still on the subject of the game's combat, I want to briefly mention the in-game tutorials, which do a fantastic job of showing the player the ropes. There are 5 tutorials which pretty much cover everything the player needs to know, as well as 3 different types of training modes. It's nice to see the developers have made a significant effort in order to help new players learn how to play the game. Once the player is comfortable with the game mechanics, the majority of their time will be spent in the Theorem League, a single player campaign that takes about 8 to 10 hours to complete. Although I'm sure some will be thrilled at the prospect of a lengthy single player campaign, unfortunately the majority of the single player experience is a slogfest for a number of reasons. The first problem that I have with this mode is that I find it to be extremely repetitive and uninspired. There are 4 leagues that the player must progress through, with a 5th league being unlocked after seeing the end credits. These all follow exactly the same pattern. First off, the player fights in a series of 5 battles until their rank rises high enough so they can rank in the top 8. Then they fight in a tournament which contains these top 8 combatants. Then finally, after winning said tourney, they engage in a promotion battle against the league champion. And after they win this fight, they have to do exactly the same thing again in the next league. The whole thing feels like a grind, and it's a shame the single player mode wasn't a bit more inventive. The second problem I have with the Theorem League is that it is far too easy. As you can see from this screenshot, I've fought in 129 fights and won 124 of them. I find that even the toughest league doesn't pose much of a challenge once the player knows the majority of the combat intricacies, and playing through a campaign of this significant length without ever really feeling challenged except maybe for 1 or 2 boss battles is quite disappointing. My final issue I have with the Theorem League is its inclusion of a levelling up system. After each fight the player gains XP, which can be spent on improving their character's stats. Although naturally you might think this would be something I should find positive, I feel as though it's a bad design choice because it actually discourages the player from changing their Pokemon. I have used Machamp the entire time I've battled in the Theorem League, and I'm not going to change that and use another Pokemon, as that would mean swapping my level 70 something Machamp for a level 1 Pokemon. The levelling up system wouldn't be that much of a problem if the game also featured a traditional arcade or survival mode to play through, as then I would have an incentive to play as another character. But aside from the Theorem League, the only other offline single player option is the ability to fight a single battle against the computer, which frankly I have little interest in doing so, meaning I've spent most of my overall playtime on Pokken just playing as one character. Away from the fighting, the player can customise their avatar and other options such as the support sets for their partner Pokemon by visiting My Town. Players also earn Pokegold from fighting, which can be used to buy new items of clothing for their virtual trainer. It is a nice little extra, however I have already reached a point whereby I've got a ton of money and there isn't anything I really want to spend it on. New items can be also unlocked by scanning Amiibo. Up to 5 Amiibo can be scanned a day, which rewards the player with random amounts of gold or new items of clothing. It's nice that all the released Amiibo are compatible with Pokken Tournament, but it's also a bit disappointing that none of the Amiibo give the player access to any unique items. I suppose though in a way it's good that content isn't locked behind them. Unfortunately I can't speak about Pokken Tournament's 2-player local play as I haven't had a chance to test it out, but I can share my thoughts on its online component, which thankfully Nintendo has absolutely nailed. I experienced no problems at all connecting and finding a match, in fact it often took less than 10 seconds to get into one, and I also had no lag during my online fights. In fact I found the online battles to almost be as smooth as playing offline, and for this Nintendo and the developers should be commended. The player can also gain XP for their characters online as their levels are carried over, and as the player wins battles they also gain points and move up the online ranking system. To summarise, Pokken's online section is wonderfully executed, and I can see myself, along with the Pokken community, playing it for a very long time to come. As we come to the end of this review, you can probably tell that I can't actually find anything to fault in terms of the actual gameplay of Pokken. I think it's a very clever fighter that can appeal to all ages and players of all skill levels. The fault however does lie in the game's content. Sadly, although the single player campaign on offer is pretty lengthy, it's a very dull affair, and if this mode doesn't appeal to the player, then there is little other significant single player content to play through. It's just a good thing that the online mode is so damn near perfect, as once the player is done with the Theorem League there really is little else for them to do. Despite these shortcomings I do feel that the gameplay does see the game through, and I feel it would be a shame to miss out on one of the most unique and inventive fighters on the market because of the drawbacks of its single player aspects. But ultimately, your decision whether or not to purchase this game has to come down to how much you think you can get out of it. I believe that Pokken Tournament is a fantastic fighter, which is unfortunately surrounded by some very mediocre gameplay modes. So thank you very much for watching, please like, subscribe, comment if you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all soon. Till next time, goodbye.